Replacing a transmission may seem like a really daunting task, but it can be a lifesaver if you're not trying to spend thousands of dollars on labor, or worse, end up having to buy a new car. The car I'm working on today has some pretty significant transmission issues. So here are the top 5 things you need to do when replacing a worn out or failing transmission. And before we start, I gotta know, what's your #1 transmission swap tip? I'll pin the best comment so it can help everyone. Now, I got this transmission for a whopping $1,800 because we got some weird problems. 1, I got a super bad whine, oddly enough, only in 4th gear. So you hear the whine? That's what I'm talking about. 2, my release bearing is making all kinds of racket. And 3, there's a really weird, severe vibration in this car that may or may not be transmission related, but since we're in there, we're gonna check it out and see what else we can find wrong. Tip number 1, get ready to rock. Make sure you have your tools, your floor jack, your jack stands, your lift, all the fluids, any gaskets you may replace. The one that's often forgotten about is one-time use hardware. That can really come back to bite you. And of course, your transmission. That's supposed to be nice. I already got oil on me? How's that even possible? This will probably make a good while you're in there thing. If you have an air filter like this, it probably needs to be cleaned. The Dirty Evolution Motorsports. By the way, someone has definitely been in here because this car has already had timing chains. I've done almost nothing to this car in the almost 2 years I've owned it. We're gonna need brake fluid even though we're not touching the brakes. Volkswagen uses brake fluid as the fluid for the clutch. It's also not uncommon to need some specialty tools to remove and install a new transmission, including a scan tool. Tip number 2 is huge and might be the most important tip out of all 5, and that's stay organized. Take your nut, put it back where it came from. These 4 bolts are just gonna stay with this tray. That's how I'm gonna stay organized with this piece. Even though I've been working on Volkswagens and Audis for well over 20 years, I still use the cardboard trick on bell housing bolts. This is the cardboard trick. I've used this on every single transmission I've ever removed, and all of them. What you do, you take your bolts out, I like to draw a circle, and then you just punch the bolt where it goes in relation to the transmission. So for me, I always do it like this, which means the first bolt that I took out is almost always the one that goes close to 12 o'clock, and then I punch it through. If you've ever wondered if I actually do these things or just like share a tip with you, like maybe happens on the internet sometimes, I made this in late 2020 and I've harvested bolts for other jobs, so I only have 2 left. I gotta get some new bolts for the Black R32 before it goes back together. You could also use something like a silicone organization pad, Ziploc bags, or another one I really love, just put the bolts back where they came from. Yeah, so these are the silicone organizational devices that work really, really well from Boltster. Whatever you have to do to make sure that you get bolts back in the right hole is going to be worth the time. Now, unless you're a Johnny Super Tech and have been a mechanic for 800 years, then just throw them in a bucket and don't worry about it. But for the rest of us peasants that can't do that, this is a method that works every single time. All right, what else? Starter's gonna come out. I actually think it's time to go up. And that's probably why tip number 3 is drain all the fluids first. This may seem like kind of an oddball tip, but I say this because I have gotten myself in some pretty sticky situations with a transmission or a differential or even an engine that's full of fluid that I need to drain, and of course, it's sitting on top of the drain plug. Magnetic tray for the stuff on the top side, magnetic tray for stuff on the bottom side. It's usually a good idea to take the fill plug out first and then take the drain plug out. That way, if for some reason you can't get the fill plug out, you don't end up draining all the fluid and then not having any way to get it back into the transmission. It does have MOS2 in it. That's why it looks the color that it does. So it's not like we've cooked the fluid or anything. Draining everything you need to first gets it out of the way, then you can give the system time to drain and hopefully not end up making a bigger mess and worse, draining fluid onto yourself. This is a magnet. We got a little bit of sludginess on there. It's actually pretty common to have some of that on the magnetic drain plug. Get all that crap off of there before you put it back in. Although if you're replacing the transmission, maybe it doesn't matter anyway, and who cares, just drain it and send it.
Think about it this way. The goal is to make less mess, and it'll also lighten up the transmission just a little bit.
This control arm is actually slotted, which means this is technically a camber adjustment. So I'm gonna put some marks on these to make sure they go back exactly where they came from. It's not a big deal if they don't, but you need to get them close. Otherwise, I can tell you from experience, you will 100% get some traction control warning issues if you don't go back to the right spot. Watch it. Now, if you're doing this on jack stands or a quick jack or something where the car's much lower to the ground, something fell right in my ear. Using your floor jack to support the subframe while you undo the last bolts works really, really well. All those bolts and nuts, I'm gonna just put right back where they came from. It's basically Paul-proofing my work here. I will say one other thing too. Before you just drop a subframe out, you need to make sure that the subframe is not what holds the engine in. A really good example is Mark IIIs. The engine mounts are part of the subframe. So if you did what I just did on a Mark III, you're gonna have a really bad day. Next up, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get everything that I need to get unbolted and undone from the top done. So that means the top side bell housing bolts, all the top starter bolts. Then we're gonna sling the engine so we can lower it a little bit and slide our transmission out. Having one of these adjustable engine supports is awesome. If you're doing this on jack stands, a block of wood underneath the oil pan and using a floor jack works really, really well. You have actually better control than you have with this because you can crank it up, take the bolts out, lower it down. Torque to yield bolts, one-time use bolts, you really need to pay attention to that. These have definitely been used before. Technically, one-time use, we'll probably put these right back in. This is also a good time to check mounts. So this is our transmission mount. Oh, what's this? Okay. I wonder, did that window the mount? That's exactly what it is. All right. I'm guessing this is probably the source of that super bad vibration. You gotta be careful with while you're in there because you can then spend all the money. But this one we need to address. Where's the rest of it? Oh, here it is. Look at all this dust is from the mount. How did that even happen? What in the world? So if you see this bright spot right here, that is these rivets smashed into the paint. I've never seen one of these mounts window like that. So I'm just gonna eyeball everybody, be sure I got what I need to get so that we don't have to come back down. Next, we're gonna do the axles. Now, something I always do is I take this exact screwdriver, I go through the vents of the rotor and in turn move the axle. That's gonna give me access to all the bolts. Now for us, it doesn't matter because we're replacing all of this, but if you're just taking the transmission out to say do a clutch, throw a mark on your axle. That way you can line it back up exactly where it all came from. Crap, something in my ear again. I'm gonna have to start wearing earplugs. Yeah. Sometimes I make a really big deal about certain things. You might be wondering, Charles, why? Like, why do I need to stay organized, right? I'm a DIYer, I'm doing this on my own time, I'm doing it at home. I think that's great. This bolt came out of the bevel box. This bolt is out of the engine mount, I think. If you'll notice on this bolt right here, there's a wider part towards the head of the bolt and then it narrows down where the threads are. If you put a normal like straight bolt like this, even if it's exactly the same size, in this bolt's location, you will destroy the bevel box because it doesn't hold it secure and tight enough. It's easy to get stuff in the wrong spot. I've done it, that's why I know. Think about Paul on his Mark V R32. Whoever the previous owner was, got one of the bell housing bolts wrong and punched it right into a water jacket. Paul was able to fix that, which is awesome. But what if it wasn't Paul that got it? What if it was just somebody else that didn't know how to fix that? Could have been in real trouble. So I make a big deal about this kind of stuff. Not because I want you to flat rate and go fast or anything like that. I don't want you to accidentally mess up your car and then cost yourself time, money, headache, heartache, especially if it's your only car. 10 extra minutes on the disassembly side will result in a better assembly, and you'll also do it much, much faster.
One more thing about our cardboard trick. When you're on the opposite side of the engine, punch those bolts through the opposite side of the cardboard.
You'll also notice that I'm taking these bolts out and I don't have the transmission supported. I usually leave one bolt in, one that I can still get to. If I left this for last, I'd never be able to get it out with the trans jack in the way. That becomes even more important if you're working on the ground in jack stands or like a quick jack or something. There we go. One transmission out. Oh. I guess this explains why our release bearing was making noise. It just broke. Okay. Oh, what's this? There's a clip or something right there. The thing I was kind of expecting to see was a bunch of play in this. Oh, there we go. The good things I'm seeing is that we did in fact, no question, have a bad release bearing. That is not supposed to come apart like that. Now, when I first got this car, it was making that whining noise in fourth gear already. Like I knew it was doing that when I got it. So I did the shim at the backside of the input shaft and it did nothing. If we were to take this transmission down, we would probably find that that bearing has just got too much play in it.
Tip number 4 might be a slippery slope, but you're doing a lot of work when you swap a transmission, so you really want to try and maximize while you're in there.
If you have a broken axle boot, this is a really easy time to do it. You're one bolt away from the axle being completely out of the car. Our clutch is right here. If you're even close to thinking about maybe you need a clutch, do it now. And if your car has a pilot bearing, another good thing to do while you're right here.
It's not the case on every car. The Mustang that we did with gears and gasoline, when I did that clutch, there wasn't really a need to replace the engine mounts.
For me, this is an area that probably should be addressed. This is our rubber damper. It's called a Jubo, and it's all cracked and split. Good opportunity to replace it when I just need to take 3 more bolts out.
I'm replacing the release bearing because it was making a bunch of noise, but if it wasn't, odds are I'd probably put a new one in while I'm here.
I should probably replace these too. They got some pretty good wiggle, but our whole suspension really needs a refresh, and I'm not prepared to do that today.
This is the perfect place to remember Murphy's Law. Even if you didn't have a problem before you started, you know if you don't do something like replace a release bearing, it's gonna fail as soon as you get the car back together. Just be careful though, because while you're in there it can really add up fast, and we're out here trying to save some money.
On your reassembly, something else you really want to pay attention to is the integrity of your bolts and threads. This is an unknown transmission to us. I tried to thread the bolts into these 2 holes and both of them felt kind of sad. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just run a thread chaser in here. It's gonna be a lot easier with the transmission right here.
Number 5 actually should be your goal anytime you do any type of car repair, and that's assemble it the same way the factory did. Now, I don't mean turn into a robot and do it that way, but what I do mean is put it back as good or better than the way you found it.
And when you're going back together with it, what you don't want to do is take one of your bolts, start it, and send it all the way in to pull the transmission to the engine. That's a good way to break stuff. Start a couple of them, go a little bit at a time, and make sure you're pushing the transmission to the engine when you tighten them up. I give you guys these tips because I, 1, want you to do a good job, and 2, I want it to be as easy as possible, but I also think it's important that I tell you when I screw stuff up. This is supposed to go between the transmission, and as you can clearly see, this is in my hand, and the transmission is already in the car. So I'm gonna pull the transmission just away a little bit and slip this up in there. Next time, I'm gonna put this bad boy right here on the cardboard.
As a technician, my goal was always to never make it look like I did a repair on the car. Things like stripped out hardware, cross-threaded bolts, improper routing are all big time no-nos. The last thing you want to do is all of this work and have your car look like trash. And if you ever go to sell the car, some people, like me, look for that kind of stuff. You might be out here doing a good job fixing your car, upping the value of it. And if you're worried you're not going to remember, take some pictures, take some videos, or just watch this video over and over and over again, and that'll help get you there too. Also, as fun as it is to joke about doing it better than the factory by having bolts left over, that's just a joke. Put all the bolts back and make sure you get them back where they came from.
I actually got all 3 mounts from 034, trans, engine, and dog bone. We're gonna save the engine mount for another day. There could be a ton of leftover fluid in your transmission, so this is really important to check. We also need to put fluid in it. Fresh, liquid-moly, good. Next, we have to adjust our shifter cables because we did a new transmission mount and it's a different transmission. We lock the transmission, we lock the shifter in the car, and this one's super easy. All we have to do is unlock the end link. One of the tricky parts about doing this job on this specific car is bleeding the new slave cylinder. You really gotta have a pressure bleeder, and then you need to pump it up to about 2 bar and make sure you put something under the car because it's gonna Step 1, start the car. Step 2, off the ground, row through all the gears, make sure everything feels good, clutch pedal feels good. There we go. Reversey works, everybody works. I know you're probably really excited to drive the car that you just spent a bunch of time and energy replacing the transmission on. Before you do that, go back underneath and just do another visual inspection. Make sure you don't have any fluid leaks or anything that you may have forgotten to button up that's gonna cause a real bad day on your test drive. So what do you need to be checking for on your test drive? You're listening for noises, you're feeling any clunking or rattling in your suspension. We had a ton of stuff apart, so that can be pretty important. You want to shift through each and every one of the gears, accelerate, decelerate in each gear, same kind of thing. Listen for noise, listen for a vibration, and that kind of stuff. I'm also listening for any noise coming from our release bearing, which, none. Yes! And if you're lucky, you can listen for Wookiee noises like we're doing right now too. Now finally, you've probably watched this video and thought, dude, why the heck didn't you just rebuild that transmission? It's not like you windowed the differential or anything like that. And that, my friends, is a great question. The main reason is I didn't want to be down the car for however long it took to tear it down, diagnose what was wrong with it, wait on parts, get it, and then rebuild it. Plus, now I have a core transmission for an R32, which they're not making more of them, and that is a perfect opportunity, I think, to install a limited slip differential and some other beefy uppiness of the transmission because I think we need to supercharge this car. So, with that, I think it's time to wrap it up. I'm out. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll talk to you again next time.